we're fortunate to have Mike Mitchell, Ganan Degelo, Ganan Degelo. I think if I say it fast enough, it'll sound proper. So he'll be opening our gathering circle with a Thanksgiving address. So Mike is Wolf Clan. He's a faith keeper at the Mohawk Nation in Akwesasne. He's a fluent speaker and uses his language every day, which is a beautiful life. And he also uses it in ceremony at the Nation Longhouse in Akwesasne. In the past, he's been Grand Chief for 32 years, and he retired in 2015. So I don't think anybody retires. I don't think Mike is retired. He worked as an iron worker, which I did. My dad was an iron worker, and it's a beautiful way to earn a living. But also, Mike was a filmmaker for the National Film Board and has done wonderful films for the Film Board, which you should all. I think you can see them on the internet. And so today, in today's world, he donates his time or devotes his time to his knowledge keeping at the national, regional, and First Nations level. So I'll introduce Mike Mitchell.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can?
Yep, perfectly.
I bring greetings from Akwesasne, Mohawk territory. It is, well, I'm saying it's a nice day, but it's starting to rain and it's still a nice day. And so we're going to start our day by acknowledging our elder brother sun for giving us the daylight, and we can see our way around as we walk on Mother Earth. We give thanks to everything that she gives us to sustain life. We live amongst all other elements of creation. And for that, collectively, we give our thanks to the waters, to the air, to the natural life, the land, the trees, the animals, the bird life, Grandmother Moon, our elder brother sun, the stars and beyond. Collectively, we give our thanks for every day as we go through our lifespan. We learn our lessons of life every day. What our ancestors has passed on to us is to acknowledge all life around us on a daily basis. And so our elders tell us, first thing in the morning, you're saying, Yawa, Yawa Koa. For everything that we share in creation is a gift, the gift of life. For the animals, for the bird life, for all forms of life. And we are just part of it. And so we acknowledge that. And the reason we have to acknowledge is because the Creator meant for us to share. I want to share with you a wampum belt that talks about a dish with one spoon. And these are reminders of treaty agreements between our nations. It is probably the first part that deals with the environment on conservation. It talks about our hunting and fishing, taking what we need, and then leaving the rest for others to share. It talks about respecting Mother Earth, respecting the water, respecting the animal and fish life, and helping to grow, so leave everything in good condition. And so when a nation send their men to hunt, they take what they need and they come back. And they'll go into each other's territories for whatever game that they're after, and they come back. That was the type of relationship that we had with one another. We listened to the guidance of our elders, our ancestors' teachings, and they honor us with song, with ceremony, to be thankful. And we gave them honor songs for the gift of life that has been given to us. And so today, we just go back a little bit because it's important. Our oral history that has been passed down from our ancestors to here, it can never be set aside in terms of modern technology. We're always in a hurry. And so sometimes when our elder speaks to us and shares with us his knowledge of things, it always boils down to sharing knowledge. The language that we speak, that I'm about to share with you, in my language is Mohawk. And that's what I'll start with. You give thanks to yourself, to the Creator. You give thanks to the spirit guardians who watch over us, protect our families, our communities, our nation. You thank Him for the gift of life. You thank the Creator for everything that we have, no matter how small, that is important to sustain life. So we give tribute to the land, to the water, animal life, bird life. And as we get done, we go through all our ceremonies throughout the year. We're fortunate enough because that allows us the opportunity to say, Nyawa, thank you that we have lived this far in our cycle of life, the health of our family, for the health of our elders could continue to be with us. We give thanks for that. We give thanks for the new faces that are among us, the new babies. We give thanks that they have received their names. All these elements that pertain to our culture, our cultural beliefs. And then we sing the honor song for different purposes to acknowledge life. And so I say these things in English very fastly because I'm going to say them in Mohawk, in our language, as I know it exists in yours. No one is allowed. There you go, one again, the watch go away. That's your one horad, there's a way of this. There's no how the way good touch cow, let the watch it. Do you jar the China don't buy your Chinese stone? Don't know any, I will no way, you jar the Ganagarun, Ganquats. Any you know, I got you, I turn it down hiking. Ain't on there, dear Chino. Any no, I got Darine, got you, I turn it down hiking. What dog I scared in Nicaragua? Now we're going to say you don't know haki. Tony no that the whalers, you teach us to go on. They know that all the attack you now, we're going to say jumps up noon. When any order digging the garage, but that's quite teach us. Let's go there to the watch here. When no just no question. One nation I got on here. I will go scanning go on Gioni, did you know what I will go? Then I don't get there and go. We have given an acknowledgement and thanks to all elements of nature, of creation. We are reminded always the thoughts to be thankful for life, for the health, our health, the health of our children, our families, our elders. So we include those words, and the sounds that we sing in our ceremonies is really an acknowledgement to ourselves, to the Creator, to all of creation, for the gift of life. So these are the words that will open your meeting today. Always speak in a good way when you're being asked. Good mind with a good heart. Share your knowledge. Those are the elements of teachings of our elders. So today, those words will be the ones that will open your meeting today. Tony Gawanage, Adaneto. Now,
Yahweh, Yahweh, Mike. We'll turn it over to Teresa Edwards. She wanted me to say that she's a mother of 3 amazing
Oh,
children, Ashley, Dakota, Derek, and a grandmother,
oh my gosh.
Giju, to Olivia and Avery. So that's what inspires her to do all the work that she's doing. So, Teresa.
Well, Alan, thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, Dr. Paulette, and thank you, Mike, for the welcoming words. And thank you to the association for the FNEAA for offering me this time to be able to share with you. I really respect that we all are working to deadline on so many things. So to have even a short while with you makes my heart happy, and I'm very grateful to have this opportunity. As was mentioned, Nimdala was in Maldales, Nina Migma, Nimdala was in Buktaway Ebides. So yes, my traditional name given to me by my elders and knowledge keepers is Young Firewoman. And what that means for me is it's a lifelong commitment for me to light the fire in people to create a better world for our people and for everyone on Turtle Island to live in peace, harmony, a lofty goal. But because I'm young firewoman, that means I have eternal youth and unending energy to be able to do that. And my staff can tell you, I have the hummingbird, Millie Dodge energy, and that's my granddaughter's name, Millie Dodge. And my grandson is, oh my gosh, I'm just spacing, Muktaway Moonjeej, little black bear. So yes, thanks, Simon, for mentioning that, because I have over 5 university degrees and all of that. But what's really my biggest accomplishment is the fact that I've raised 3 children who are balanced, wonderful, healthy children who have not had experience of sexual abuse, violence, and that they've grown up learning their culture and ceremony. Language, I speak at a 4 or 5-year-old level, but I'm working on that. And I'm teaching all the traditional knowledge that I know to my grandchildren. So I'm able to put an end, to that cycle of all that was experienced. My mother attended residential school. So I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to share about this. I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint that I normally use with folks. Hopefully that's going to work. And it's coming up empty. Is there any way that you can load it? Do you have it there? Is Joe or anyone? Is it possible to pull it up for me?
Somebody will pull it up for you.
Is that going to be
Just take
possible, Joe, or should I just take the time I can just go through? Pauline's mentioned a lot of the points that I want to cover or expand, but really I want to link them to education and why it is we're doing this. As was mentioned, I am the ED and the in-house legal counsel at the Legacy of Hope Foundation. We've been around for 22 years. We do not receive core funding from the federal government. So we make our money by doing workshops. We provide curriculum written by Indigenous educators who have written from kindergarten to grade 6, grade 7 to grade 12. And we do these workshops as well for small, medium, large businesses, government offices, and huge, companies anywhere from Adobe to Pfizer, Barbie, Mattel, you name it. We do workshops to train them on the importance of knowing Indigenous history. And I just came back from 7 weeks touring Southern Ontario. The reason that I did it was because it was in French. So it's kind of making history. It's never been done before. in Ontario where Francophone students were taught about Indigenous history, or the teachers were taught, and it's not mandatory here. So for the teachers always say they're not comfortable, they're nervous teaching Indigenous history. And what I always have to bring them back to is that, you know, we teach about the Holocaust, we teach about slavery, we teach about wars and Remembrance Day and everything that is associated with that, and we're not experts on that. But we must teach about the history of Indigenous people of Canada's the foundation of North America, right? And if we don't do that, then we can't get to the point of reconciliation. So we have to start at that point. Oh, thank you. There we go. So some of this would be a shorter presentation that I would do. And we have a lot of these tools available for free on our website, or you can reach out to us. We have lots of videos that you can show in the classroom for children of all ages, and we have curriculum. Just to mention right off the bat, I'm hoping that there's no one will be triggered. I'm going to talk about some difficult content, and I'm talking quickly, not to be dismissive about it, but just to get through the material. But I want to emphasize to everyone that I really want everyone to have self-care in place after this, because it might not hit you right away, but it might hit you tomorrow or the next day. And the importance of doing this work, or for any educator really, is to have balance in their life when doing this, so that the thing that I always tell people that I'm training is the last thing I want to do is inflict guilt and shame on people, because that was what was done to us just for being Indigenous, right? So as our act of reconciliation and educating Canadians, that's not what I meant to do, is to, wag the finger or to be guilting and shaming people. However, we have to make a heart-to-heart connection with people, and they need to realize that this isn't 100-year-old information. This is very, very recent. So in the presentation, I often will use photographs that have been shared with us from Library and Archives, from the former Department of Indian Affairs, now Crown and Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, or directly from survivors and their families. So next slide. And these are just some of the highlights. And why are we teaching this? Why is this so important? I almost think it's more important for our Indigenous youth than it is, it's equally as important for different reasons. When we think about residential schools, why do we teach this? Well, we need to teach it to our kids because of the fact that they don't realize the impacts that it's had on 7 generations of attending these schools. And I always tell them, our brains are like supercomputers. Everything that's told to it every day gets downloaded. We're kind of born with a clean slate. And, these kids, the government gave money to all these different churches to run these schools. And we know that over 150,000 students attended. There was 168 schools. You'll often hear about 139, but that's because those were the schools that were part of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. But it doesn't mean that there still wasn't 29 more schools that existed with thousands of students that attended those. They just did not receive compensation because records had been burned, the school had been burned, things were destroyed, floods, what have you. And they started in the early 1800s and ran until 97. And we often hear, the last school closed in 96. Yes, federally run. But there was in Inuvik a school that was closed in 97 at Grolier Hall. And we're estimating more than 15,000 students that died, while thousands more suffered from malnutrition or other untreated illnesses. And you often hear people talk about, well, there were children dying of illnesses, there was malnutrition everywhere. No, if you were to dig up the grounds of schools, residential and otherwise across Canada, you will not find the same circumstance of what we're seeing with the unmarked graves of the children that are being found at a residential schools. This is something that is very specific to First Nation and First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. Next slide. Again, why does it matter? Well, because so many generations, not only the people that attended, but their children, their grandchildren were subjected to so much abuse from mind, body, emotion, spirit on a daily basis. And our people have experienced deep and lasting trauma, and the effects of, not only impacted them personally, but the relationships with them and their children and their grandchildren, and so on and so on. And we use this image here. This is an image of Thomas More, and he was used as basically the poster boy to promote residential schools and keeping them open throughout history every time an intervention happened, to basically convince Canadians. So how I explain to them is that whenever atrocities have occurred in history over time, the people in power, generally the governments, would, if they had an agenda that they wanted to fulfill, they would create fear between two separate parties of citizens in the country. And this was actually labeled in the archives as propaganda poster. So it's an image of Thomas More, who's dressed in girls' regalia, not even the proper boys' regalia, but he has a knife and gun in his hand. And it was used to threaten people, to say, if we do not put these children, if anyone challenged, why are you doing that? Why are you putting these children away? We've heard so many complaints about it. It was used to say, well, he's dangerous. They'll rape, they'll steal, they'll kill your children. This is the only solution. And you'll see a later photo where Thomas More is dressed with his haircut and in a suit, and it was intended to say, this is the after he's been quote unquote civilized. But we know that was the furthest thing that occurred at residential school, because the most savagery of acts were committed against our people for generations. Next slide. So why is it important to Canadians, and why should it matter to someone who never attended? Well, it matters because these post-traumatic effects and racism continue in Canada today. They're very present. We wouldn't have over 100 First Nation communities that don't have access to clean running water if racism didn't exist. That would never be allowed to happen in policy legislation. We wouldn't have education levels at a lower degree for on reserve than we do for off. These policies have been allowed because for 7 generations, yes, our people suffered through this, but for 7 generations, Canadians have been conditioned to see us as inferior, or to be able to put up with these terrible circumstances, and basically learning these racist legislation, policy, and programs for 7 generations of Canadians. So they have a whole unlearning to do as well. And as much as we have to do with our healing and retraining our minds to take back, the power for our lives, to help heal the trauma for ourselves and our families, Canadians on the other side need to learn about the history, what role they play, what benefits they have received as a result of the atrocities that were committed, and what they can do to be an ally, how they can change, and different actions they can take. We have, for example, a free document called Raven as Messenger, which contains all kinds of ideas matched up with several of the 94 calls to action. And it's for allies, because we get that all the time. What can we do? We have a little pamphlet called What You Can Do. And then we have Raven as Messenger, and it gives concrete, specific steps. It really lays it out for people of different acts they can take to advocate as an ally for Indigenous people. And I always correct people when they say, what can we do to help Indigenous people in their healing journey? And I say, nothing. You can help stop, racism and poverty and homelessness, and advocate to change policies and program and legislation that negatively impact our people still today. It matters because Indigenous communities continue to face this discrimination and these injustices within the law, within policy. We've suffered trauma, loss of our languages, family connections, teachings, values, and one thing I always take care to spell out when people talk about residential school syndrome, or, impacts of even saying residential school, that Indigenous people were impacted by residential school. It sort of takes away from the reality of what happened, in that it wasn't the schools themselves, it was those that were trusted and charged with our care who abused that. And it impacted self-worth, self-esteem, cultural pride, all our values, our relationships, the way we interact with one another, our relationships with our parents, our siblings, grandparents, with the land, with food. When we hear about the malnutrition, and I spent a week at the first residential school at the Mohawk Institute and hearing about how the children were served oatmeal with powdered milk for every meal, and if they didn't eat their breakfast, they had to eat the same bowl for lunch. If they didn't eat it at lunch, they had to eat it cold at supper. When there was a plethora of apple trees and cows and chickens and milk, but that was not given to the children. There is no argument that could convince me that these measures were taken to educate, that these measures were taken to assimilate, that these measures were taken to civilize or anything. And what's super important when I'll go back to the point of saying why it's important to teach our children, we can go to the next slide, is the fact that I want our children to be proud of who they are. I want them to know, and I've heard it from travel. I've traveled to over 110 communities within Canada, and I've heard from so many youth that they say, well, it's always been this way. You know, my grandma drinks, my mom and dad drink, there's always been family violence. And my biggest dream for them is to embrace that is not who we are. For more than 14,850 years, people say time immemorial, but I'm just saying minimally 14,850 years, we had successful methods of trade and economies, rules of engagement for war. We had justice systems. We had structures in place. We weren't walking around willy-nilly. We knew how to navigate this land. In fact, we helped the first settlers on this land. They would have never survived without us. So really, when we hear these arguments that are, it was to help us survive better in Canada, it was to help they're simply not true based on the actual facts and statistics that we've been here for over 15,000 years successfully. And it's only been the last 150 years with the links to residential schools and subsequent day schools and 60 Scoop that we've had these socioeconomic challenges or problems and trauma. So at LHF, we're committed to, and because we don't receive core funding from the government, we can be candid about Canada's real history. And we believe that by educating people, it does help in the building empathy, understanding, respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and it creates awareness and it encourages the public. My goal is to ultimately inspire Canadians to want to take action, to not feel that they're personally responsible for things that happen, but that they're personally responsible for wanting to take action and make change. Next slide. This is just about the LHF, that we've been around for 22 years working with survivors. We were the first national Indigenous organization that met with thousands of survivors, and we actually gathered their testimony and were entrusted with hundreds of those oral testimonies today. And that's to be separate from testimonies that you heard about that were taken for insurance purposes, that it went along with Indian residential school settlement agreements. That's completely apart from that. So these are on our website. You can listen to them. We have an accompanying resource, if Let the Truth Be Told, that has activities that you can use in the classroom, in your workplace, anywhere really. And it's, everything's all there for you. Basically, you can click on the free links to the testimonies, and in our Let the Truth Be Told document, it has activities that you can do with the group that you're working with that accompany the testimonies. We also have testimonies from the children and grandchildren of survivors, so you can really see how it's played out in the day-to-day lives of survivors and intergenerational survivors. And as I mentioned, a big part of our mission and mandate is all about building reconciliation between Indigenous and not. So we do that through the education and building resources to educate Canadians about what happened, what the impacts are, and what they can do to contribute to more respectful, equitable relationships in Canada. And then on the flip side of that, we work directly with survivors and intergenerational survivors to develop all kinds of resources. So we have communication products, we have lots of short films that are all free to watch on Vimeo. A lot of them are bilingual. If not, they have the transcription, you know, the headings underneath in French or vice versa. We have different activities that accompany. We have over 30 exhibitions. We'll go to the next slide, please. We have over 30 exhibitions that are all about using art and education. So different means of reaching people, the public, students, kids. And part of our ethical guidelines, you know, it's really difficult. There's so many differences among our nations. You know, when we think of how people make advances in Canada, for example, I always envy, you know, the French saying that they, despite their economic situation, their religion, their nation, their status, anything, they were able to advance the rights of the French because they came together for one common purpose. We don't have that same commonality of language because we're so rich in nations and we have so many languages. It would be difficult to choose how would we advance just one language, right? But one thing that we do have in common, which is true for almost all nations, is the use of oral traditions and oral testimony. So LHF uses that as, you know, we don't interact with any survivor unless they're going to come out better off than when they first engaged us. We want to make sure that they have tools and resources to help them on their healing journey that they can use to share with their family if they so choose. And that they can do it in their work, whatever area they're working on in their lives. And secondly, it's, you know, we make sure that we have knowledge keepers, elders, psychotherapists, therapists, all available whenever we do projects because people could be triggered, to make sure that we're constantly supporting health, safety, well-being for everyone involved. But we get their input on all our communication documents. We get it on the content that's going into our exhibitions. We have exhibitions that are on the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the links to residential schools. So it's the role of women and how that's changed over time because of colonization. We have on escaping residential schools and those that died in residential school. And LHF has been probably about a year and a half ahead of the news and what comes out. So our original one was Where Are the Children? That came out before the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Then we did one, Begaywen, Truth Telling from the 60 Scoop. That came out right before the 60 Scoop Settlement Agreement. And we have on day schools as well, as I said, escaping and about children that did not make it home right before the uncovering of the graves. And for many Indigenous people, this isn't news for us. We've known this for generations. It's just nobody was listening. We didn't have policing authorities that would investigate. We didn't have the means to actually do the uncovering until this became a public issue and made, you know, all Canadians aware in 2021, sorry. Next slide. I just threw this in here as this is, of course, a tool that anyone can use as a way to educate people, talking about the differences between children returning to school in September now with what Indigenous children faced when they went to school in September, and, you know, teaching them about the history of Phyllis Webstad's creation of the orange t-shirt and her story and how she has used this as a way to educate people from across Canada, well, around the world really, about that everything was taken from our children down to the favorite shirt to basically kill the Indian in the child. And next slide. and we create a new orange shirt every year as well. And we use the funds for that to support on the land healing workshops, cultural reclamation workshops for survivors and intergenerational survivors. In fact, a drum making workshop held on Friday, and then there's others in the East, 3 of them that are happening in December in the East Coast, and then moving around out West. So we're traveling throughout. I have a team of the department's called HR and Wellbeing, and their team is all about cultural awareness and community liaisons, going out into community, helping restore traditional knowledge to people as a form of healing. And why do we do that? Well, we've realized from what survivors have told us for over 20 years is that the number one thing that's helped them to recover from what they experienced while in residential or day school or the child welfare system has been the return to culture, the return to language, the return to ceremony, the feeling of belonging. And so that's why we've made a huge investment into doing on the land healing with survivors and these cultural reclamation workshops. And I have a 8-minute film that I was going to switch to quickly here. Do you think are we okay to go to that, Simon?
Yes. I've just been looking at your website. There's all these wonderful films on it.
Yeah, there's so many resources that, when I hear people say that they don't have tools, it's just, unfortunately, it's because they don't know about them, because we don't have a huge communication budget. But we're really, in the last 2 years, it's skyrocketed the amount. I mean, our website crashed on September 30th when we launched a survivor portal of all videos with different survivors sharing about what they've used to get through their healing with other survivors. And then we have by province, all mental health resources and cultural resources as well, all on that website. So it's crashed several times because we had something like 40,000 people trying to access it at the same time. So we're so grateful that that's been happening. Oh, there we go. If we can start that in just even 5 minutes, just to give you a sense, because who better to hear it from than survivors themselves? And these can be used in the classroom or in your community at events as well.
Is it working for everyone?
No, I thought it was just me. It's
Okay.
frozen.
Sometimes when you're the one that thinks it's working, it's working for you, but not for everybody else.
All right, I'm going to try to figure it out.
So we want everybody to be thinking about questions for the Q&A after. I've got lots, so.
Okay, great. There we go.
They've been there for generations, and they've had an
Can we
impact
hear the audio?
on generations of
perfect.
Aboriginal people in
I'll just restart.
Canada. The residential schools went much farther back than the 60s, 70s, and 80s, which were the more recent times that we've heard about. But they've been there for generations, and they've had an impact on generations of Aboriginal people in Canada.
She would never ever sit down with us and talk to us about what happened to her there.
Or an artificial community, which is what I would term residential school to be.
Sakajum ila ikpigijum ila paklu isuma baklunga Inuit sa araw kasugi nasukpaklugi ilang at tigusulit. Ukaw sa ringit at tinik. Solo kanitin maktaw waklutik amaro. Kalunatut solo. Ukagayok sa titaw makigasuin nakluta. Amaro ilang itigut.
Le 17 février 2003, j'avais un de mes amis qui devait recommencer à travailler, mais il n'a jamais recommencé à travailler parce qu'il s'est suicidé une semaine avant. Puis c'était ça, c'était les séquelles du pensionnat que lui, il n'a jamais été capable de passer à travers.
We have to recognize that this is a part of a great number of people's lives now, whether or not they were at school themselves or whether they lived in communities where these schools were present. It has a huge effect on the lives of Aboriginal people in this country.
In the late 19th century, the Canadian government undertook a formal partnership with church entities to run industrial, boarding, and residential schools for Aboriginal people. The Indian residential school system was designed to impose foreign languages, foreign religions, as well as the values and work skills of Canadian society on Aboriginal children. More than 130 industrial, boarding, and residential schools operated between 1831 and 1996. The schools were operated by various Catholic orders: the Church of England, which later became the Anglican Church, the United Church, the Presbyterians, the Mennonites, the Baptists, and the Salvation Army. The earliest was the Mohawk Indian Residential School, opened in 1831 at Brantford, Ontario. The schools existed in all territories and in all but 3 provinces: New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland. In the north, the residential school system also included hostels. In 1920, Duncan Campbell Scott, the bureaucrat in charge of Canada's Indian policy, made attendance at residential school mandatory for all children between the ages of 5 and 15. At the time, he said, "Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic." The missionary Hugh Mackay, writing in 1903, characterized the system itself as an effort to educate and colonize people against their will. The residential school system was part of a deliberate, systemic effort to kill the Indian in the child. This was accomplished by removing generations of children from their families and communities, and by alienating them from their language, culture, and broadly speaking, Aboriginal ways of living in the world. For those traumatized by their experiences in the residential school system, the policy of forced assimilation has resulted in pervasive loss. Loss of identity, loss of family, loss of language, loss of culture. As early as 1907, inspectors called the residential school systems places of disease, hunger, overcrowding, and despair. As late as 1950, according to an Indian Affairs study, over 40% of the teaching staff had no professional training. In the early 1990s, beginning with Phil Fontaine, survivors came forward with disclosures of physical, sexual, and other abuses. Many former students are today pursuing healing and reparation for the humiliations they suffered in residential school.
The way children like me survived residential school, I think, is by never forgetting home and mom and dad. Knowing somebody loved us kept us going. Friends and family do keep us alive.
Moi, j'ai grandi dans un territoire de chasse et pêche qu'on appelle au nord de Parent. Et puis, on était une grosse famille. Je me souviens pas d'avoir eu faim ou d'avoir eu froid, tu sais. Même si on vivait dans le bois, dans une tente l'été comme l'hiver, j'avais toujours l'essentiel, puis j'étais toujours heureux.
Grandmother was familiar with a lot of the medicines and the plants and things like that, and very well versed still in the stories. But because she was the first one who lived in a residential school, she had it taught to her not to speak the language and that the language is bad and not useful. And what would happen is that you would reach a certain point when she's giving us some information on something where she would want to speak or tell a story in Cree because it would be more full or get the point across better. And you could see the struggle going on within her where she didn't want to do that because she felt that she had bad feelings about Cree and how useful it was going to be for us in the future.
Residential school removed a lot of students for the simple reason that we were poor. But we have to be so careful how we name poverty. The poverty of lack of affection is a real poverty. Lack of affection from parents, for instance, and then our opportunity to love our parents back was certainly one that I felt extraordinarily in residential school.
En 1957, je savais déjà mon frère le plus vieux puis ma sœur la plus vieille, eux, ils avaient déjà été au pensionnat. Puis je savais qu'au printemps suivant, à l'automne suivant, je veux dire, c'était à mon tour aussi de partir, puis de quitter pour la première fois mon père, ma mère, puis le territoire où j'avais vécu jusqu'à là. J'avais 7 ans. J'étais nerveux, puis en même temps triste aussi, parce que j'allais aller à l'école, puis je ne savais pas trop qu'est-ce qui m'attendait là-bas.
A lot of these children that were coming in, other students were coming in with basically nothing in terms of language and so on. And some of the students that were coming in from the north would come in with grade 8, and when they got tested in the school itself, they'd end up with grade 3 or 4 in terms of the comprehension. And you couldn't really see a lot of these students that were 12, 13, 14, 15, sitting with 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids. And there was that conflict all the time. They were separated from their families. They were separated from the extended family and the communities. They didn't get that care and comfort that a family would give. And the sad part of it all is, let's say they stayed away for 10 or 12 years in these residential schools, and then they tried to go back. They couldn't go back because they'd lost all contact with that way of life. If they tried to migrate into the urban settings, they weren't really embraced as they went there either. So they were refugees in their own country.
I know it affected a lot of the children as well. I went to school with.
Thanks so much. So I just wanted to give you, whoops, my camera's off. I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of that's one of our oldest ones. A lot of the other films that we have or short videos are a lot more current and have more updated information. But I just wanted you to have a little bit of a glimpse. And again, why do we do this? Well, the Indigenous population is growing at a rate of 4 times any other nation in Canada. So now is the ideal time that we need to indigenize education. We need to give non-Indigenous teachers the resources that they need, and we need to give our Indigenous teachers the resources they need to empower our students, our youth for the future, so that they do have the tools that they need to be able to cope with difficulties like our ancestors once did, and rebuilding those family relationships. As I said, for me, my biggest feat in my life is the fact that I consider that I've broken the cycle, with my family. I'm the youngest of 10 children, and we grew up with a lot of the impacts of residential school, and not to say that it's perfect with my family, but the fact that for 35 years, I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I don't smoke cigarettes. My children never grew up with that. They've grown up with ceremony. They've grown up with traditional teachings. That is the way, has been the way out for us to end, the cycles, the impacts of the negativity, the negative self-talk, and repeating the pattern of abuses and subjecting. I've been able to protect my children from being around abuses and all of those things, which maybe to the average Canadian isn't a big deal. But if you look at the stats in our family and where we came from and what we were subjected to and gone through, and then you look at my children, it's a miracle. Really, we are miracles, you know. If we can just go right back to the PowerPoint, I just want to touch base on a couple of other points to show you some resources that you can use. So as I mentioned, how we gathered the testimonies was in 2005 to 2008, we received project funding from the Government of Canada, and we worked with the 22 different communities and brought residential school survivors and intergenerational survivors together. And it was the first time that they ever had a forum where they were able to tell their story in an empowered way, where they were able to tell their truth, where they were able to share with one another and just validate and talk about, you know, their experiences that they had at school. Because one of the biggest things is that they'd all been isolated, right? And now we know, you know, from psychology, all of the things. Now it's super important to, if you look at Sesame Street, if anyone's familiar with Sesame Street, they made it so that you could see Snuffle, really dating myself for younger people, but so that it wasn't like gaslighting Big Bird. Meanwhile, all our children, you know, but further didn't have an avenue to talk about it and you know, commiserate and share with other people. But thankfully, we have started to do that and come together and reclaim our and share our experience, strength, and hope with one another. Can we go to the next slide? And as I also mentioned, there's the videos of the children and the grandchildren, and you can find them. The first project was called Our Stories, Our Strength. And then the second series, which was in 2019-2020, was Our Stories, Our Strength Continues. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of the exhibitions really quickly. Can continue. So here is the posters that I was mentioning of Thomas More, the propaganda posters used by government to convince any Canadian that questioned the abuses that were happening at residential school. And Thomas More was used to show what he looked like before and what he would apparently look like after attending residential school. And this is all part of Jeffrey Thomas's curated exhibition for the Legacy of Hope Foundation called Where Are the Children? And this was used by the Truth and Reconciliation, and it toured all across Canada. So often people think it was from the TRC, but it was actually LHF that created this with the curator, Jeffrey Thomas. We'll go to the next slide. And all of these, as I say, they're free to borrow. And we only charge for shipping. And if the flagship exhibitions that we had that were touring around to use art and education as a way to connect with people and to engage students in critical thinking, to deconstruct history, and so that they could learn about all of the ways in which Indigenous people were negatively impacted throughout history, bringing us to the situation of the socioeconomic stats that we're facing today. Next slide, please. So this is a permanent installation that we actually have at Wabano Health Center in the second floor. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's our timeline, but we actually have the poster for sale on our website with updated since this permanent installation was made. So it's up to date, and you can have it in the classroom and use it as a tool for teaching in any, in any way for children or for adults. And if I mentioned it, a lot of the exhibitions come with an activity guide or with exercises that you can actually do to make it really interactive and not just something that you go to and read. There's either videos that you can listen to of survivors, or there's art that you can do, or messages of hope and healing that you can write to survivors, or they can make keychain. There's all different activities associated with each of the exhibitions. The next slide. So our curriculum, that's one of the things that we're really, really proud of. Back in 2012, because it's not mandatory to teach Indigenous history in Canada, it was a really big feat for us to push our, at the time was 100 Years of Loss curriculum, and it was adopted by the government of NWT and the government of Nunavut in 2012. And since then, it's been adapted through Yukon as well. And not only is it used by their social and northern studies teachers, it's throughout their curriculum. Like, they've made it their own. So the territories are really good with having the resources, from what I understand, of integrating indigeneity throughout their curriculum in all areas. And that's what I intend to do for every other province and territory or every other province, I should say, in Canada. Next slide, please. And these are just some examples of some resources. So we have the teaching bundles. There's the document, Let the Truth Be Told, that it's activities that you can do while watching our oral testimonies. That's the timeline I was referring to. This is just an example of one of the books that we inherited, all the resources from the Aboriginal Healing Foundation. We have all of them available to be downloaded, and we don't have many of the hard copies left to share, but they're all available in downloadable formats for you to access. And they're still, even if they're 10, 20 years old, they're actually really great resources when it comes to talking about Indigenous history and tools, how we can reach Canadians and engaging them and teaching them about our history. And then we have the USB with, again, it's being changed to Generations Lost, but the curriculum in digital format, because as you can see in the top left, we had it on CD. So now those are just used for skeet shooting. No, just kidding. Next slide. My dad jokes, sorry. Some additional resources we have on the right is Seeds of Change. That's for kindergarten to grade 6. And so it's exploring Indigenous history and activities that kids could do in an age appropriate way. Now, it's really minimal in that it's one resource for each grade, but right now we're in the process of developing Coursera, which will be for adults to be able to take a course similar to the one of U of A. Well, I mean, different content, but similar in principle, that people can take this free course or use it or share it with their classrooms. And then we have Begawin coming home. That's for grade 7 to 12, all about the 60 Scoop. And we have other resources that are for grade 7 to 12. But going back, sorry, what we're looking for funding that we're in the process of developing is that we'll have curriculum for a full curriculum for kindergarten, for grade 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then the others, the more tools for grade 7 to 12. But that's just to show you some of the actual curriculum that we have. We can go to the next slide. So when people ask me, the way forward for me is that we educate our children about our history, promoting our pride and the importance of language, cultural reclamation, connection to the land, connection to family, connection to our nationhood, all of those things that we were meant to have and inherit and have plentiful in our lives. And that is the biggest gift that we can do to help in our own healing journey and in the education of our children going forward. And then the other side is continuing to educate Canadians about Indigenous history, including the colonial impacts and, ongoing impacts that are happening today, and promoting allyship and eliminating their role in eliminating racism and discrimination. And of course, we want to eliminate racism and discrimination with Indigenous and non-Indigenous as well, right? We engage with all we have partnerships with new immigrants, refugees, because again, when they come to the country, they're not educated on our history. So we do partnerships with those communities as well, so that they're learning firsthand from us the truth. So when they get jobs working and delivering programs, policies, services to our people, they have an understanding. We also do training for police. I was involved on Police Equity Council for 4.5 years. Now I'm on the Child Welfare Board to try and educate them. And I, for years, would volunteer with the Taweegan homeless shelter to educate young women who are homeless about overcoming and starting with taking their power back and creating their own journey, helping them map one out for themselves, and including in that, giving them the supports that they need of community and tools that they would need on their healing journey. Next slide. And this is part of the document that I was referring to, that we give our allies, and anyone feel free to give it to your allies as well, or hand them out, at school or anywhere, workplaces, anything at all. This is just the appendix, but the document can be downloaded for free off our website, and it has the levels of action that they can take, for themselves, with their family, with the community in the region, within Canada. Is it switching? There we go. And then there's the reference to the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've just chosen a few, and we gave some examples and possible extension activities that people could do, because people are always asking us, what can we do, and I'm always giving them opportunities to say, well, stand up to racism, challenge stereotypes, myths. If you don't feel safe to do something, record stuff with your phone, bear witness, be an ally, attest to what you've seen or witnessed, the discrimination happening, to put an end to it. Next slide. There's even letters and templates in there as well to help people if they want to take any kind of activism with writing to government. And so these are specific to the calls to action on health, justice. We can go to the next slide, please. And on reconciliation. So I just wanted to throw that in there as another resource that we have. I noticed the time, it's already getting late. Next slide. And this was just with some of the staff, everyone that works at LHF, I say it's a calling, it's not a job. Everyone, it's super important. One of our number one priorities is to keep the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being of our staff, our team, very balanced and healthy. And we do traditional events. We have circle gatherings. We do events outdoors 4 times a year. We have recognition meetings with staff. We do cultural activities. We really put to practice everything that we say and encourage other people to do. We do that at our employment. If someone needs time off because they're going goose hunting, we give them that time off. We really put into practice everything that all these different things that I'm suggesting that can be used to indigenize, not only education, but workplace, but most importantly, we have to make sure that everyone is in a good mental, physical, emotional, spiritual way in order to teach this information without being, guilting, shaming, angry. It's normal to feel those feelings, but if we're going to reach people, we need to come to it from a place of love and balance and understanding and kindness for one another. And these are just some of the things that I ask staff, what would you want an average Canadian to do to be supportive of Indigenous people? And these are just some of the things that people listed about respecting and supporting Indigenous sovereignty, learning about the treaties and demand that Canada honor its treaty commitments, consider future generations in all of our actions. Something that I tell people that I do workshops to all the time is I say to them, when you have children and grandchildren or great grandchildren, and they come to you and they say, oh, you were alive in 2021 and 2022, when all the uncovering of the children at residential schools, were found, and it was in the media. What happened? What did you do? Did you take to the streets? Did you contact every news outlet? Did you have protests? Were people outraged? And I ask people, think of who you want to be, how you want to be remembered. What action do you want to take in leaving for our future generations, right? Do you want to show that we are compassionate, thoughtful, loving people who love our nations and our traditions and our culture and language, and that we, despite everything, have come together to work with Canadians to build reconciliation? Or do we want to say we did nothing? I just question people to say, what legacy? That's the actual, for me, I don't use the word legacy when I think of impacts of residential, because I think of it as a positive thing, legacy. So I ask people, what legacy do you want to leave your children? What good things do you want to leave? I always talk about the terrible impacts of residential school, and I say Legacy of Hope Foundation, or legacy that we leave our future generations. But these are just some of the things. Question and resist stereotypes, reach out to Indigenous neighbors, come to some of our events. You'll love it immensely. Learn about Indigenous people in the territory that you live in or places that you go. Remember that we're all connected, and mostly appreciate the diversity of all nations, culture, and people, and realize we all deserve respect, dignity, justice, and peace. And that's human rights to want to have us. It's moving slowly. It's saying that the internet's unstable. And here's our website and our general email. And we say Walalin or Walalio. Thank you, Miigwech, merci. We hope you continue to access these learning tools and commit to fostering reconciliation in Canada. I know it was really quick and it was just a snapshot, but I hope that you feel inspired, that you have some tools that you can use to start to indigenize education within your community or when interacting with Canadians. And, if you want resources in hard copy, feel free to reach out to us. We're there to help, and we're there to work in partnership with people. Walalin, thank you.
Miigwech, I learned a lot, and I'm sure we all did with your presentation. We have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has a question for Teresa, she's here. That was the time to ask. I learned the other day is that be comfortable with the silence while people are thinking,
It's a lot to digest. And again, I want to reiterate for people that, I'm speaking about it factually and quickly, but it's heavy stuff that I'm talking about. Yeah. And most of us are personally affected, right? So in order to be able to do this work in a good way, we have to make sure that we take care of ourselves. One of the ways that I do that is spending time with my grandchildren and going hiking in the woods, especially in the snow.
My father told me when I got old enough, he said, never let anyone think they own you. I knew exactly what he was saying. So we got Denise with a question. Denise? You have to unmute. Or maybe
can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear.
Oh, now I can't hear you. Just a
Can you-
second here.
We could hear you.
Okay, I'll pass. I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay. She's saying thank you. So we got a few people saying thank you in the chat. Teresa, I think what we'll do is I saw Dr. Tremblay, Paulette, busy writing over there as you were talking. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Tremblay for closing comments.
Well, Teresa, Nawagoa. What can I say to you? You are just amazing. I think that the effort, we all know as educators, the effort that goes into preparing documents, to writing, and then to use them to teach, and having to do them with project dollars on your own without funding is just simply unbelievable. However, I think there are monies to be had in different places. I want to thank you for the in-depth, like you went in real depth about how you got the stories and how you interact with survivors. And I am sure that those survivors were grateful, because just sharing their stories is unloading and helping them to be okay. So the gift that you have given to all of the people you have interacted with, and all of the people you have taught, and all of the people you continue to create materials for, is something that we all should be thankful and grateful for. Your compassion, for your commitment, for your caring, and for your love, because not everybody does this, Teresa, and that you've taken it upon yourself to make it your lifelong journey through the foundation, and by lighting that path, I think you've earned your name. I think you continue to inspire that passion, that fire that is so important to have that in you. You do it for healing. You do it for love, and you do it so that everybody can become better. And I mean, it's so selfless. It's so, it's not work that's for the light of heart, for sure. And so all of the details you've shared, the curriculums and how you're looking for money to help you go through to build some more of that. I think that we might be able to look and see how we might get to different funding agencies to, might be project dollars, but at least it would be money so that you can keep going and developing those, full curriculum for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 12. Have you taken testimony of how much the learners have valued these experiences, Teresa?
Yeah, we actually are looking into that right now as part of our evaluation. We're right now, we know, as I mentioned, for survivors, our portals crashed because it was access. Yeah. And so that's really heartening for us, because we want to make sure that we're sharing experience, strength.
Yes, well, we can appreciate it, because we are doing something similar, but with members, right? And we charge small fees for some things, but we do things for free, and other things like you do, like our town halls are free, and we do that on purpose because we want to share, because that's our mission and vision. It's what we're supposed to do, and we're supposed to focus on traditions and cultures and languages and to help people. And I know that people have been very positive in their rating of, like we do evaluation. I'm an evaluator, so we've created tools to evaluate, and anything we create is for free use, so that people can change them and use them and apply them, implement them, so that they don't have to do it because they don't have the money, they don't have the knowledge, and they don't have the skills to do that. And so it's our job then to do it for them and to help them. And so I see that you've been doing it all on your own for a lot of years, and you're teaching your children. That's commendable. It's just totally wonderful that you've done it on your own, lighting the path for your children to be, not affected by all these negative things, because so much healing going on right now, and people are hurting and aching and lost. And so when they can be stronger and empowered, it's so crucial. This is heart work. And I think that you've allowed them to be able to dream about future possibilities for themselves. And I think that when you're talking about the school, residential schools, Mohawk Institute, your parents went there, and so I've been there. I know what that feels like and looks like in it. And you walk in, and you're there's a sadness that just overcomes you, that your heart aches, and you feel. I think it's your ancestors, coming through and saying this was not a good place. The feeling that you get is surprising. It's very emotional. And you're right. We have to have people can help with triggers. So we need to support institutes that stop racism and legislations and policies and help people know what they can do to help us. And I think that everybody has a voice, and you've stepped up before it was time to step up. And that allows you to have all this material and all this understanding, which we are grateful for and appreciate so much. So again, I want to hold you up and say thank you. This has been an amazing learning opportunity, and we're very grateful. Keep up the amazing work.
Llewellyn, thank you. If I could just say one thing to encourage people, this last year and a half since the uncovering of the children, it would have been our biggest support we would have received would have been, like I said, 8,000 hits on our site in a month. And, as a lawyer, I would have 20 to 40 emails in my inbox that I would be operating on. And right now I can't even get my messages on my phone to connect with my work email because I have 26,000 emails. Now they're responded, but we're going to be actually having a team sitting and going through the emails. And to me, this is an amazing problem to have, because what it shows me, and for 30 some years of my career, I always thought, the goal is the federal government. We need the federal government to fund us, and all of that. But what it showed me in the last year and a half is that no, we just need us. We need us, and we need Canadians that are working together, because we have mobilized so much in the last year and a half versus what I've seen happen in 20 years prior, trying to get communication out, trying to get news out. So I, on a spiritual level, do believe the children made themselves known at a time when society could handle it, at a time where people will actually take action and respond. And the response and the outpouring of support that we've had from Canadians, people used to say I was a Pollyanna, that I believe, oh no, they knew how terrible it was. Canadians are all racist, but I honestly believed that if Canadians knew the truth, they would behave differently. And I have to say, in the last year and a half, the amount of support from 5-year-olds sending their birthday money to, like unbelievable. I usually can't even tell you without crying because it's so overwhelming. And that's what's empowered our staff to feel that this is a passion. This isn't just a job, and that we're doing creators work. We're doing good work. And that's because of all people coming together, our people, all nations, First Nations, Inuit, Métis, all different organizations, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, like every person imaginable reached out to us. People I never would have ever expected, from engineers to electricians to pot stores to you name it, like anyone and everyone saying they want to do something. Tell us, what to do, even if it was just sharing information. It's not always about money. It could be just mobilizing, just sharing information, putting stuff on their website. And I hope to leave everyone with that message of hope that people do care. And when given the tools, they will behave differently. And we are raising these new generations of kids that I have 100% faith that these children are going to leave a better future for all of our kids, because they are getting the proper education. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks for letting me share. Walalin, thank you.
Thank you. We got lots of comments in the chat, appreciating your presentation, your materials. People are gonna, I think, like, you're transforming people's lives, and you've done it here. So Yahweh, I'll turn it over to Mike Mitchell, Ganande Gelo, for a closing blessing. Mike.
Yahweh, I want to thank everyone for sitting in, participating today. It's really nice to hear that presentation. The sharing of information with one another, sharing of knowledge, experiences. It just made me feel proud to sit here and listen, take it all in. And so it took us a long ways, restored a lot of our confidence, energies to keep going. I thank the ones that put this presentation on. I thank the ones that are organizing this whole effort to get this thing moving. The sharing of information on education matters. Sometimes it isn't about paper. It isn't about grades. It's really about digging deep, going back deep into our culture. The beautiness of languages, stories. And that's what I've been seeing and hearing for this group. So I just want to compliment everyone. It's not a waste of time. It's not wasted energy, because all these things are what our people are looking for. The teachers, the parents, the communities, the First Nations of this country, the Indigenous people, soon comes to the realization that what we're chasing is the spirit given to us by our ancestors. And that spirit reflects our traditional knowledge, languages. And that really what motivates us to live the strong, good, healthy life. Maybe the residential school took a lot of that away. And maybe Indian Act, Indian interference of government policy, turning us around and taking us into not a good road anyway. So we're reclaiming our knowledge. And this is what this effort is about. So I thought I would say that to everyone, because you can't leave today's meeting without feeling good. And strength has to returning. And so I will close off the meeting in the same way that I open it, in our own Indigenous language, and also on top, We thank each and every one of you for spending time with us. Noa, when it's alade, honani agaho. Just one horado, that's the way I did. I don't know how to touch cow, Jihonjad, not the dirty wayant. I will go near a teacher to go on at the Harvey, net 9 key. I ain't what down here that stop. I want you going on your own. Because I hear I ain't go out, you know, go on. Then I'm going to hold the Kirihonyani, a teacher to go. What we have shared today from honoring Mother Earth and giving thanks to all of creation, all the elements, from the land to the water to the air, to the four winds, to all the animal life, to all the bird life, to all of creation. These are things our ancestors have taught us. They're always close to the Creator. And so the European people misunderstood us when they thought these are all paganistic teachings or beliefs, because no one has been closer to the Creator than our people. And that through the residential school, they try to make us ashamed of who we are when they talk about killing our spirit, killing the indigenous spirit within us. And so today we're in a era of reclaiming that. And for some of us, a lot has been taken away. We'll share with one another. We'll pick each other up and we'll walk that road. Nation building, re-educating, reclaiming, rebuilding our nation starts at home within ourselves. And with those words, I officially put an end to our meeting for today. Yama, thank you for everyone attending and sharing. This is the type of knowledge that we should across the fire from each other and learn. So, Yama, for today, this concludes our meeting.